Alright everybody, get ready for some sims from the past. Ones that are probably long forgotten, yet absolute legends in their own right. So go ahead, put on your pink nostalgia glasses, you'll need them to survive the old graphics and hideous textures. First up, the one, the only, Dodo Sim Bell 206 JetRanger for Flight Simulator X.
What?
Hi, Martin here. Okay, let me explain. When I started working on this video, my original idea was to compare an older helicopter sim to a modern one. And because the Dodo Sim was my first serious dive into helicopter simulation, and because there are JetRangers available in today's sims, the choice was obvious. My goal was to show that older sims of course had worse graphics, but sometimes better simulation depth, and a certain finesse that many modern ones, well, lack. Keep watching to see how that turned out. My last video covered the same helicopter across 4 different contemporary simulators, comparing their strengths and weaknesses. Naturally, the next idea was to compare the same helicopter across different sim eras. And that got the ball rolling again. I eventually settled on doing a bit of a history tour, with a personal touch. My entry into helicopter sims is part of my childhood. My dad and I always had flight simulators on our home PC. In my teenage years I spent a lot of time in helicopter games like the 1998 Team Apache or the 1996 Hind. And I've played Microsoft Flight Simulator since version 4.0, by the way. Yep, I'm an 80s kid, grew up in the 90s. In the late 90s and early 2000s, MSFS started including helicopters. Some were controllable with the hardware I had, others, well, let's just say I had no idea what I was doing back then. Around the same time, there was another simulator called Fly, by Terminal Reality. It stood out compared to MSFS because its built-in aircraft had far deeper system depth. And there was a sequel called Fly 2 that included a Bell 407. Now Fly 2 itself and that 407 weren't that great, which might be a topic for another video by the way. But they came with a manual that explained helicopter aerodynamics in a really accessible way. I actually enjoyed reading a manual. Who can say that for himself? ChatGPT even found a website for me preserving most of the helicopter section of that manual, and I linked it in the description. If you're new to helicopter flying or curious about the basics, I really recommend giving it a look. That manual deepened my interest in helicopters, and since the internet as we know it today started becoming a thing, I learned more and more, through websites and later YouTube. And through all that, in 2010, I discovered a strangely named FSX add-on called Dodo Sim. FSX itself had a Robinson R22 and its own Bell 206, but neither of them went beyond what we would now call GTA physics. Dodo Sim, however, brought external flight modeling and system simulation. It came as a proper boxed product with a detailed printed manual, which I still have. So what made it special? With the external software making up for the limitations of FSX, Dodo Sim really tried to simulate the JetRanger as realistically as possible. Something that no other helicopter sim besides maybe X-Plane or Fly even claimed back then. When you loaded it up, the engine wasn't running. To fly you actually had to know how to start it, avoid hot starts and do a proper takeoff. The manual even had an ad for a helicopter control setup. That and the difficulty of controlling the Dodo Sim once airborne made me rethink my joystick. So I modified my Cytec X52 with an extension and added a makeshift collective lever on the throttle. Here are the remnants I kept in the attic. And I realized I need rudder pedals too, and bought some. While researching for this video, I found out that the Dodo Sim developers released version 2 as freeware, which is great because the Steam version of FSX no longer supports my original boxed copy. It loads, but the helicopter itself won't start. Thankfully, version 2 runs just fine. But enough talk, let's look at the Dodo Sim in action. Besides the startup being critical in a Bell 206, it's actually not that complicated to operate in terms of systems. Check everything is off except hydraulics and the fuel valve, battery on, horn mute. Anti-collision lights on, check the caution lights, test them, collective down, throttle closed, fuel pump fuses in, area clear, starter engage. At 15% N1, introduce fuel by twisting the throttle to idle and closely watch NG, TOT and oil pressure. This is where things get spicy. The temperature rises really fast. You must keep the starter engaged until the engine stabilizes, otherwise you will cook the turbine. If you mess up, TOT shoots past the limits and that's goodbye engine. The original Dodo Sim even showed fire and yelled at you in a prompt for destroying it. Version 2 doesn't, but it's not fun destroying the engine anyway. Point is, Dodo Sim simulated all of this. Once at idle, switch on the generator, avionics, gyro, lights, then slowly bring up the throttle while keeping torque under 40%. The Bell 206 is loud in real life, and Dodo Sim is no different. There's a headphone simulation option, but I'll keep it in natural and just reduce the volume in the edit. Lifting off takes practice. To hover, you start with slight aft cyclic to raise the front of the skids, then lift the helicopter up fully. FSX doesn't show this well in the replay, but in the cockpit view it actually feels decent. This phase took me ages to get right. I practiced over and over. Lift off, stabilize, hover taxi to this grass strip over here, stop, stabilize again, then a pattern around the field, or maybe just hover around a little more. Back then the difference between this and the other sims was overwhelming. I'd drift left, right, forward, backward, constantly chasing stability. But I knew it was my own fault. I just needed to get better. With more experience and the better hardware I own today, there definitely is more confidence these days, but not so back then. The graphics are ancient and some details didn't age well, but the flight model simulates torque, hover attitude, instability, inertia and pedal changes during flight phases. And version 2 feels smoother than I remembered. It wasn't perfect, of course. No ETL, no real translating tendency, and during auto-rotations the Dodo Sim rivals, well, gliders.
One eternity later.
But there's a lot of nostalgia tied to this sim. FSX and Dodo Sim was simply a great package for getting into helicopter simulation. FSX also had mission scenarios, and you could modify them to be flown with the aircraft you wanted. I spent hours in the Hawaii course landing on that yacht here, or approaching this Tokyo skyscraper helipad, or landing on the moving truck in Oshkosh. Like modern MSFS challenges, but with more freedom. Bottom line, the Dodo Sim for FSX absolutely deserves a warm place in every old school heli simmer's heart. But the Dodo Sim wasn't the only JetRanger. There was another. After the FSX era, I moved to X-Plane and discovered a much bigger helicopter community, more refined models, and easier access to both payware and freeware. FSX still lived in the boxed add-on era, while X-Plane felt much more modern. Among all the developers, one stood out: Dreamfoil Creations. Thanks to Dreamfoil, we got some excellent helicopter models. The unforgiving R22, the feature-rich Bell 407, a very realistic Schweitzer 300, and one of my personal favorites, the AS350 B3 Plus. And yes, you guessed it, there also was a Dreamfoil Bell 206 JetRanger 3. X-Plane offers more advanced physics and smoother input response, which took some getting used to. So how was the Dreamfoil 206? Coming from the Dodo Sim, I was used to its feel and sound. Dreamfoil also simulated the startup realistically, but at first I still preferred the Dodo Sim. That changed quickly, because wow, was this thing ever fun to fly. Dreamfoil gave it a real sense of mass and inertia. It was stable, but not too stable. To place it exactly where you wanted required precision and practice. But mistakes were recoverable. Most X-plane helicopters, including the Dreamfoils, support auto-rotation. Some aspects hold up even today. Entering the auto-rotation, managing rotor RPM with collective and cyclic, all modeled to a certain extent. But the rotor inertia is just too high and the lift too strong. Even with collective full down, it just doesn't want to descend. Still fun to fly, but sadly not that accurate. I compared it in X-plane 10 and 11. It behaves the same. And X-plane 12 doesn't support it anymore. X-plane 9 might have been a different story, but I misplaced my copy of it years ago. Also getting the 206 package again, which I also lost, wasn't easy. I managed to rebuy it from one of the only remaining sources I could find. Link in the description. Before I did some research for this video, my last info on Dreamfoil was that any development work had been ceased. Yet I'm very happy to be able to share that Fred seems to be up and about and working on a new project. Ironically, what seems to be a new and massively improved Bell 206. I'm very looking forward to this one. Besides these two models, up until MSFS 2020 I never heard of another one challenging or surpassing them in functionality and realism. If you know one I should check out, please let me know. So we are through with the past and reach the present. Let's look at the current options. There's the Cowan Sims 206 and the 206L Long Ranger. But honestly, within Cowan Sims lineup, these models are somewhere between semi-realistic and realistic. Fun to fly? Definitely. But not quite the best shot I'm aiming to compare here. So instead we're taking a ride in the FlyInside 206 JetRanger, available for MSFS 2020 and compatible with MSFS 2024. This one used to have a bit of a meager rating in MSFS 2020. It's rated better now in MSFS 2024, but not as high as the most popular helicopters. One reason I could think of why this is its quite unforgiving nature. For a beginner, it definitely is hard as stone to control. I also still find myself struggling if I am too demanding of my own precision flying. If I want to land it at some exact point within 1 or 2 meters, I tend to over-control it myself. Also, at first I wrote it off as being unrealistic, trying to be too realistic. If that makes sense at all. For me, it took making this video and watching JD's latest video about it here to really appreciate it. So, what's the deal? Let's start it up. Starter on. Watching TOT. Oh gosh, TOT too high. Turbine dead. Check. Okay, again. Starter. Fuel. Now that looks better. TOT stabilizing, NG rising, good start. And listen to that sound, especially the gearbox. The transition into that classic JetRanger bus is fantastic. Now instead of a clean demonstration flight, I figured it's more helpful to walk you through how I deal with handling the FlyInside 206. Let's start with the liftoff. 1. The left pedal needs to be introduced gradually. From collective full down up to about the halfway point, the pedal demand isn't static. It ramps up. You need to phase the pedal input in slowly. 2. Getting light on the skids takes a lot of left pedal. Be ready. This is quite common on Bell helicopters. 3. The cross-tube flex is not simulated, so you don't get the visual cues that the helicopter is close to lifting off, while still sticking to the ground. You must feel it and know the correct cyclic and pedal setup. 4. Place the cyclic slightly aft, enough to prevent drifting forward on pickup, but not too far, or you will drift backwards. It's a bit of a narrow window where the stick has to be. You might need to react quickly to arrest any tendencies. 5. Expect left roll and drift. A small right correction keeps you centered. If you catch it early and don't overdo it, lift off will be pretty much straight up. 6. Make corrections ahead of the helicopter. The FlyInside 206 has some input lag. Every correction may need a counter correction. But 7. Avoid pilot-induced oscillation. If you get into a feedback loop of overcorrecting, lower the collective, stabilize and set it down gently or in the way you can make it. But it's best to start back off from the liftoff. 8. Be patient with yourself. I think it's safe to say that hovering takes the most training to get right. If you are into helicopters, chances are you already have some or a lot of experience with fixed-wing aircraft. In this case, you will find forward flight not that challenging. But taking off on the spot, hovering for a few minutes instead of seconds, or not at all, that's a whole other ballgame. And it takes a lot of time to do it. But be patient with yourself and the sim. Taking the FlyInside 206 for a spin requires constant attention, but that's part of the charm. The input lag and the heaviness of the two-blade rotor system make it feel sluggish in cruise. In a good way. There's proper ETL, and if you respect the torque limits and stay inside the envelope, you'll notice it's not easy to push it much faster than about 100 knots. All of that is very realistic and honestly puts a smile on your face. Landings are the next big challenge. You have to fly them slowly, with a clear mental picture of how you want to approach the landing spot. By that I mean planning your flight path using both visual references and your instruments. How fast am I going right now? How high am I above the spot? How far away am I from the spot? Can I decelerate smoothly to the spot? How much descent rate do I need? FlyInside simulates vortex ring state, so once you're below 40 knots, you absolutely cannot descend at any rate you want, drop fast, and you will settle into your own downwash and crash. You need to shallow your descent to something like 300 feet per minute maximum, and that alone can be pretty challenging. As you can see here, I misjudged my height a bit and arrived over the landing point slightly too high. If I still want to land instead of going around, I need to creep forward slowly, or even hover out of ground effect, and keep the landing zone visible in the lower part of the front window. Then I have to carefully manage the descent rate, keeping it under 300 feet per minute, until I'm safely in ground effect over the target and can settle the helicopter onto the surface. What I should have done is plan my approach better, shape the flight path so I can combine the deceleration with the descent and arrive right over the pad at low height. Like this. Another brilliant feature I only discovered while making this video. The auto rotations are actually really good, once you understand how to handle them. At first I dismissed the flight model in this regard because I thought it couldn't handle auto rotations at all. But since one of the recent updates, that's no longer true. That said, I still wouldn't call it perfectly realistic. Let's walk through a straight-in auto rotation so I can show you what I mean. In cruise you can simulate a real turbine failure by chopping the throttle while still at cruise torque. Or to avoid the sudden sink rate and the low RPM beeping, you can lower the collective first, then roll the throttle back to idle. If you choose the second method, first gently pull aft cyclic to stabilize the descent. Then roll back. As long as the collective is in the lower third, the transition to idle is pretty smooth. After rolling off the throttle, drop the collective fully and shift your attention to the cyclic. If you're still faster than 60 knots, pull aft cyclic slightly. Rotor RPM will rise immediately and the descent rate will reduce. If you're slower than 60 knots and have enough altitude, push the nose down to accelerate. Once you hit 60 knots, return to a gentle flare attitude to maintain that speed, like so. Keep an eye on rotor RPM. The FlyInside model, in my opinion, gives the rotor a bit too little inertia, which makes overspeeding the rotor easy when the collective is all the way down at 60 knots. So once RPM comes back up at around 100%, raise the collective slightly to stabilize it. Now you're in the auto rotation envelope. Stable airspeed, high descent rate, but not falling like a brick. You can adjust speed with the cyclic and manage rotor RPM with the collective. You can even turn to adjust where you will land. Perform quick visual scans of your instruments to know what your rates are currently. But don't forget, your primary task is to pick a safe landing spot and commit to it. Don't get too caught up into tuning your rotor speed and airspeed. As you reach about 100 feet AGL, roughly telephone pole height, the critical final phase begins. To arrest the descent rate, you can't just pull collective in a gentle flare. That will eat up the rotor RPM and you will hit the ground hard. Instead, you need a steep flare. Pitch the nose up 20 to 30 degrees like this. It's something you do by feel. During the flare, adjust pedals and lateral cyclic to keep the helicopter straight and stable. The flare will reduce your descent rate and increase rotor RPM. Add a touch of collective if needed to prevent overspeed, but not too much collective, and keep your focus outside. Once you have slowed down to about 25 knots and you are close to the ground, gently pitch forward to avoid the tail strike. At the same moment, start raising collective to cushion the touchdown. Level the helicopter and try to bleed off the last few feet as smoothly as possible. Then freeze the cyclic and wait for the skids to contact the ground. That's the theory. Now let's watch that again in real time. In cruise, roll back to idle, drop collective, add aft cyclic, stabilize at 60 knots. Watch your landing area and turn if needed, keeping 60 knots and about 100% rotor RPM. At tree height, flare aggressively. Ride the flare until the airspeed is nearly gone, lower the nose, raise collective, and cushion the landing as gently as possible. Easy enough, right? Well, no. Here are a few of the not so successful auto-rotations I recorded while making this video. It's not pretty. There you have it. So what can I say? In my opinion, the FlyInside 206 might not get the praise it deserves. The MSFS SDK still imposes quite a few limitations when it comes to making helicopters behave realistically, and only a handful of models, ones I'll talk about in future videos, manage to work around that with good results. In that context, the FlyInside external flight model really shows what's possible. Of course, there are trade-offs. The rotor inertia, for example. In my opinion, it collapses too quickly during auto-rotation touchdowns, when you don't follow the textbook procedure exactly, like here. And the missing cross-tube flags is only part of the problem with the skids. Quite often the FlyInside 206 scrapes along the ground on touchdown, where in reality you wouldn't feel more than a bump. As for stability, I'm a bit on the fence. Pilato42 mentioned in his video here that the instability feels a little too aggressive, and that using the stability assist gave him the closest match to real behavior. I definitely feel the difference between 0 and 5% stability, but the overall character stays the same. If the model should be a little less twitchy, I think it simply needs more tuning. But regardless of these quirks, it's an absolute blast to fly. I genuinely recommend adding it to your fleet if you haven't already. So, is it inferior to older Sims? Not really. What making this video actually showed me is how far helicopter Sims have come. Sure, there are still gaps in realism, but some models really do stand out. And hopefully, with MSFS 2024, we will get even more helicopters that push past the unrealistic behaviors of the included ones and raise the bar even further. I can't wait. Alright, thanks for watching and enjoy flying your favorite sim.